Hello, welcome back to the Harmony Inspired Health Podcast. Today, I'm beyond excited to be speaking with a woman who deeply embodies her message, her wisdom, and her Dharma, Katie Rose. Katie is a well-known yoga teacher, doula, Ayurvedic guide, and the author of her newest creation, Yoni Codes, a sacred text that blends Vedic wisdom, goddess archetypes, and practical feminine rituals to reclaim the wound as a source of creative power and ancestral healing. This conversation isn't just going to be about theory or philosophy. It's about embodiment, trauma, healing, and the path to remembering who we really are through our cycles, our intuition, and the divine feminine codes encoded in our very being. So whether you're struggled from feeling disconnected with your body, or you've experienced womb trauma, or are ready just to deepen your spiritual practice through feminine ritual, this episode is for you. So let's dive into the Yoni Codes. Welcome, Katie, to the podcast.
Thanks, Harmony. It's lovely to be here. And what a beautiful introduction. Thank you.
You're so welcome. I would love to start with you explaining what Yoni Codes actually are and how this concept was birthed through your own spiritual and life journey.
Yeah, sure. And actually, I mean, that was a gorgeous introduction. But as I was listening, I was like, gosh, I sound really woo-woo, don't I? And the truth is, I'm a very down-to-earth, practical person. And the Yoni Codes was really birthed out of practical necessity. So about 6 or 7 years ago now, I got divorced. At that time, I had 4 children, and some of them were still quite young. And I found myself in a very unexpected sort of life situation. I'd gone from being quite financially comfortable and feeling very secure and feeling like I was kind of set for a long period of time, for the rest of my life, let's say, into living on my own, co-parenting, struggling with my ex-husband. Like, we're good now. We've become friends now, but it took time. So the first little while was difficult. And I didn't have much money. And so I was like, gosh, I actually need to do some serious personal development work right now. I need to heal myself. There's a lot here that needs unpacking and working on. And I don't have a lot of time and I don't have a lot of money. But what I do have is a lot of knowledge and resource from the years I've spent practicing Ayurveda and yoga. And so it was really a bit of a kitchen sink sort of grassroots project of like, what can I do when the kids are sleeping? What can I do when the kids are at school? What can I do at night when I'm feeling so much grief and overwhelm and fear about the future? What tools do I have and what am I drawing on? And I initially, this was nothing to do with writing a book or sharing it with the world. It was literally my own sink or swim moment. We have these pivotal moments in our lives where the SHIT hits the fan and it's like, okay, how am I resourced here? What have I got? And so I started this kind of project of self-healing, and it took really honestly probably 2 or 3 years until I really felt stable and back in my center and resilient again. But the pieces that were absolutely integral in that happening are what I write about in Yoni Codes. It's part memoir and I kind of tell my own story and my own journey, but it's also these tools that I found really invaluable that I could fit in around a busy life, kids, not expensive, not time consuming, and modern practical. I didn't get to go and do panchakarma or like head off to an ashram to heal, which would have been great. Or, like the Elizabeth Gilbert kind of eat, pray, love, I'm going to go around the world and find myself again, would have been awesome, but it wasn't available to me. So it was like, what can I do at 8 o'clock at night in my own lounge room that's going to pull me out of this challenging time? So yoni is a Sanskrit word that really doesn't have a translation into English. I mean, we need to use lots of, like with so many beautiful Sanskrit words, we need to use lots of English words to get to the essence of this word in Sanskrit. My teacher always said Sanskrit is the language of poetry and philosophy, and we kind of lack that in the English language. So it means womb, but it also means so much more than that. It means portal of creation. It's the seat of Kundalini and the divine feminine. It's our power. It's our Shakti. It's really the fierce warrior goddess and the motherly, nurturing goddess all in one. It's the spark of anything that we create as women or in the feminine. And then codes, I mean, a code in its most simple form is the unlocking. It's what is required to gain access and to unlock. And so Yoni Codes is the unlocking of that divine feminine potential within us. And for me personally, that healing journey, which, as I said, I then later went on to share, because I do think we need to come to a place of a certain amount of resolution and healing within ourselves before we can go out and share it with others. Like, I don't believe in offering healing to others when I'm still in the thick of it myself. So I kind of took a few years. Like I said, I went through the journey, and then now here's the book, and I'm kind of ready to share.
Amazing. And I think you said a few important things there. And first of all, a lot of listeners are probably thinking, yeah, I don't have a lot of time and I don't have a lot of money. So, what are these things that I can do to support myself? But then the other important thing you said was it took me like was it 2 to 3 years to heal? And I think I just wanted to bring that up because often people think, okay, this is going to be like the next thing that's going to take me 2 weeks of practice and I'm all healed. When we hear of these wonderful different ways of being able to support ourselves and our health. But in reality, depending on the depths of healing that needs to be had, like it's a journey. And I don't like to use that word because it's so cliche, but it is. It takes time. And so I think if you don't have a lot of time and you don't have a lot of money, but you have, a few minutes each day to be realistic with like the healing outcomes. And so I think that was like an important aspect to bring up. But I did want to ask you, like you describe the yoni as a sacred seat of feminine power. So how does reclaiming this power impact a woman's overall health and healing and their spiritual path? Like, why is this such a powerful way? We know that we've got to put in the work and the time. Like we said, we're time poor, but if we can be consistent over a period of great time, it's going to really support our health and our healing and our spiritual path. How so?
Yeah. Let me speak to the timeline piece first of all. And I'll share a pretty personal story, which I haven't been really in the business of sharing very much, but it's very relevant to what you're saying. And, I believe in transparency. So there's a part I write about in the book where I did this practice that was part of my healing. I called it my Book of Men. It was actually recommended to me by a friend of mine who's a healer. And basically, what I did is I bought a journal and I sat down it took months, weeks, months. And I journaled a little bit, not every day, but, several times a week I'd sit and journal. And it was a record of my relationship with men throughout my entire life up until that time. And I got divorced the year I turned 40. So 40 years on planet Earth. I wrote about my father, my brother, any men that had sort of been significant in my life growing up. Good relationships, like I had a couple of male bosses who were really brilliant men and formative and supported me. Bad relationships, men that had, violated me or lied to me, whatever. The whole thing, ex-boyfriends, and then, of course, my husband. And then my sons, these 4 beautiful boys that I had birthed. So it was this epic, very personal sort of divulging and just releasing, I guess you could say, like unshedding, unburdening. It was a really powerful practice and very emotional, like a lot to process. When I had finished that, no one ever read it apart from me. I will say that it wasn't for anyone to see other than, me and God. I went down to the beach. My kids were at school. I had a day off and I basically did a very private ritual where I burnt the book and I threw the ashes into the ocean. And I kind of went through this whole journey of releasing and letting go. And the idea was to really reset and create space to welcome a new partner into my life. I was like, I'm ready to be, I'm only 40. I don't want to be on my own forever. And I'm actually ready to meet someone that is a good match for me and be in partnership. So I went through this whole journey, this whole ritual, and I was absolutely sure that I was going to meet the man of my dreams after that. So much so that when I did meet someone, I went online dating. I just decided that that person was going to be the one. And I didn't really do much due diligence or research or, there wasn't much discernment there. And I ended up getting into a relationship that was not great. And this guy was not great. He cheated on me and he lied to me and it wasn't good at all. And I'm out the other side of that now. And it's, again, more layers of healing, more layers of healing. But the reason I share that story is because we can decide and we can kind of like have this agenda, but actually it's a co-creation between us and spirit, source, God, whatever name you want to use. And yes, we get to be active participants, but we also have to surrender to whatever the plan of the universe is. And for whatever reason at that time, it wasn't my moment to meet my life partner. And even though I had decided with quite a lot of ego that, now I'm ready, you get what you get and you have to work through it in the timeline that you choose. And, I think there's a certain level of, yes, we can manifest and yes, we can call things in. And also at the same time, we need to surrender and we need to let go. And sometimes life sends really serious curveballs on our path. For me, what I've learned, one of the biggest spiritual lessons of my life is not that I get to control what's happening and not that I'm in the driving seat of the narrative at all times, but I do get to choose my responses and I do get to choose the learning and I get to choose not to be a victim and I get to choose like the phoenix coming out of the ashes to rise again. And so there's a lot of empowerment there, but it just might not be around. None of us know. This is the great mystery of life. It's mentioned in Bhagavad Gita so many times. We don't know what's going to happen next. It's all Krishna's grace. So that next layer of letting go was a big, big lesson for me. It's interesting that you pick up on that idea of the timeline because that's been a big, big lesson in my life. And then the other question that you had around the womb as the portal. I mean, there's so many different layers in which we can answer this question. We can talk about it in quite an esoteric way, and we can talk about energy. I think about, I write in the book about the koshas, the different layers of the self, or sometimes called the different bodies. We can think about the womb on the layer of pranamaya kosha, which is the energetic imprint. But we could also think about it in a very practical way. Like if we look, really simple basics. All of us are living in a patriarchal society. We still live in a world where women do, without doubt, in 90% of households, most of the domestic work. Like, what an interesting phenomena. Here we are, so evolved in our, polarity of masculine and feminine and our personal development and our spiritual growth. And yet, why is it that the woman mostly stacks the dishwasher and folds the laundry? I'm curious about that. Yes, Yoni womb codes are about tapping into the energy of the divine feminine, celebrating the goddess, but they're also about very simple things like equal rights and true co-creation and the balancing of masculine and feminine. And another element of that, which adds another layer of, I guess you could say, complexity, is that I write about this quite a lot in the book. I don't believe men and women are the same. So I'm not into this kind of 80s version or 60s, 70s, 80s version of feminism, which is like the woman becomes like the man. I'm very interested in the polarity teachings and what it means to be in that dance of male and female. But I'm also interested in what true equality looks like and how we get to be different but equal. And I don't think we yet have a paradigm for that. I think that we're still floundering when it comes to figuring out what that looks like. And we see the pendulum kind of swing, this whole trad wife thing now is a very interesting pendulum swing in the other direction. And at some point, I reckon, I hope, we'll get to that beautiful sweet spot where we actually go, okay, we're figuring something out here. We're actually finding equilibrium and balance and a way that we can be in our feminine, be in our masculine, co-create together, and it's fair and sustainable. So actually quite a lot of the book is about that and what that might look like for individual families, relationships. As parents, I think about that in the way I'm raising my sons. What does it look like to raise boys that are not part of the patriarchal problem?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess when you talk about Yoni codes, because I guess what comes to mind with Yoni codes is that it could be mistaken for just rituals to empower the Yoni, Right. So it goes beyond rituals for the yoni. It's really about the codes of that deep essence of feminine embodiment.
Yeah. Yes and no, because yes, in the sense of like a formal ritual that you might set out to do, like, okay, I'm going to do yoni steaming or I'm going to do, use crystals or something like that. But I also think the idea of ritual ceremony, it's very interesting to me because I really believe, another beautiful Sanskrit word is this word sadhana, which is conscious spiritual practice or daily spiritual practice. And the more mature I become in my spiritual practice, what I realize is everything is ritual, everything is ceremony, everything is sadhana. Like literally, housework and sending emails and just all the mundane details of life has the potential to be holy, has the potential to be divine, has the potential to connect us to our feminine if we can pause enough to remember that and to be in relationship with that and to not be in this, one of the things I notice in myself, like in Ayurveda, I'm a Pitta type, there's a lot of fire, I'm a pretty type A personality, is often there's a hardening because I'm like rushing and I'm busy and I feel like I'm very oriented towards productivity. And so there's a lot of push and a lot of, yeah, like a hardening, a calcification that comes with, like, I haven't got time for this. Like, what does this person want? What's like that kind of grappling with life? And part of the Yoni Codes teaching, and isn't it true that we always teach what we need to learn, is the softening and the surrender and the slowing down. And there's great ritual in that. So I think part of my intention in Yoni Codes is like, we don't actually have to make loads of changes in our lives. It's not about that. It's about living the life. I mean, sure, make changes if that's what's needed, but also what about living the life you've been gifted and you're already living, but doing it with more love and more reverence and more joy, just like, sucking the juice out of life and enjoying it. That's really what these practices are about.
You also speak about ancestral healing. So, how do you see womb trauma pass through generations, and how can women begin to interrupt that cycle?
Yeah, again, this is a multi-layered question. So one of the ways that happens is through what we call tarpana in the Vedic tradition, which is the true honoring of the ancestors. And I'm not sure when this podcast will go out, like if it'll be soon, but as we're recording, it's the 2nd of September and we're heading into a portal of tarpana time. So this is a really great time in the Vedic calendar to honor your ancestors. And, that might sound a bit formal. Perhaps you think, oh, I don't know really what that means. But if you've got any photos in your home of your relatives, that's an honoring of ancestors. If you have pictures of your mum or your dad or even your beloved pets, especially anyone that's passed away, that's a form of honoring the ancestors, telling people stories, remembering those that came before us. And we're very fixated in our culture, in our therapy culture, and I'm not speaking against therapy because I think therapy can be really useful. But sometimes therapy can be a lot of digging around in all the things that went wrong, what our parents didn't do right. And the reasons we're like this is because of X, Y, and Z, and sort of unpacking all the trauma and tragedy. Actually, part of ancestral healing, for me, a really potent part of it, has been looking back through my line and finding the strong women, finding the warriors, and we can see both in every person. Like if I think about, just to give a very quick example, if I think about my maternal grandmother, my mum's mum, she was an alcoholic. She was a pretty absent mother. There's a lot of reasons why my mum is the way she is because of the way her mother was. And so it would be very easy to just kind of go, oh, she was a bit of a write-off, really, as a mother and a grandmother. And there's truth in that. Absolutely, there's truth in that. But also, she was born into poverty. She elevated herself into wealth. She was extremely glamorous. She was very intelligent. She was a journalist. She spoke several languages. She lived through a world war and thrived afterwards. And so I can look at, oh yeah, she had a drink problem and she was, she packed my mum off to boarding school and she was pretty absent. And the trauma stories, and they are real and they exist. Or I can say, isn't it fascinating that my grandmother was so strong and had this clear vision of what she wanted to do with her life, and didn't let anyone mess with her and didn't let anything get in the way, and that she was so smart and that she was so resilient. And so part of honoring our ancestry is to look at both sides and to say, yeah, there's some shadow, there's some dark stuff there that definitely, we need to work through and not sweep under the carpet. I'm certainly not suggesting that. But also how joyful to look at the interesting and, celebratory parts and go, oh, there's part of her in me. And where do I see that in myself? And celebrate that and amplify that, because we are, epigenetics shows now 7 generations back in our DNA. It's unbelievable. 7 generations in our DNA. We are formed by our ancestors. But it's not all bad. It's not all only the trauma. There's also, like I said, the joy, the resilience, the creativity. And so I'm really interested in tapping into that. And sometimes I think about my grandmother, like, if I'm feeling, for example, she was so glamorous. She looked like Marilyn Monroe. She died when I was 13. But when I think of her, I see someone that's so pretty and well groomed. And, that's not how I am in my life. But sometimes when I need to give a talk or walk into a room, like I had the launch for Yoni Codes recently, and I really wanted to be in my feminine presence, I think about her and I almost channel her energy, and it's like she's with me. And that absolute, she was a woman that held her head high. That confidence is part of my DNA. So why not pull that thread through?
I love that so much because our perception really does shape the way that we present ourselves in the world as well. So if we're pulling in the strength from our ancestors and the embodiment of their qualities that we want to, portray into this life, then that's how we're going to show up, as opposed to, like you said, digging into like the darker sides, which, we're not denying either. But if that's sort of what we're going to rest our laurels on, then that's where we're going to be. I also speak about it in my book, like the different, my mum was adopted and she turned to alcohol. My parents, my dad's parents were both adopted, and like the identity piece and trying to understand your ancestry was difficult as well. And so yeah, it can be really comforting to sort of pull on the strength of what you know of the people around you. So I really love that. And so within, honoring the Yoni codes, this is the feminine presence of ourselves, are there some special techniques or rituals or ways of sort of healing through these codes that you can do in a practical sense?
Yeah. In the book itself, I go through 30 different practices that women can do. And some of them are very practical, some of them are a bit more esoteric. So it's definitely all there. What I would say as a starting point is it's really interesting to look, again, I'll mention the koshas, which are these 5 layers. It's interesting to look at these different layers of ourselves, because what I've noticed in myself and in many of the women that I work with is there tends to be areas of strengths and weaknesses. So we've got physical body, the actual, our physical being. We've got the energy body, the pranamaya kosha, which I spoke about before. We've got the mind, which is the manomaya kosha, or the faculty of intellect. And then we've got vijnanamaya kosha, which is our emotions, our feelings, our intuition. And then we have the spirit or the soul, which is kind of separate to, it's the essence of who we are. But for most women, what I find is there might be 1 or 2 areas that are pretty strong, that they've got it together. Maybe it's physically, maybe they're fit and healthy and well, but they really don't trust themselves. So that energetic piece around tapping into intuition, trusting yourself is not present. Maybe they're really intuitive and they're really in touch with that side, but the physical body is neglected, and there's, a need to kind of turn the lens onto physical health. Maybe it's mental health, which again is a separate thing. So the first recommendation I make is that, and this is the first part of the book, we do a bit of an inventory and we look at, really honestly, without judgment and without shaming, where are my strengths and weaknesses? Like, where am I kicking goals and I'm all over it and I've got my stuff together, and where am I struggling? And very often this will be not just your own lived experience, but it's also karmic. There's an element of, some of us will come into this lifetime with a karmic conditioning or predisposition towards struggles with mental health, or towards physically not being that well, or towards, some people come in with a really attuned intuition and literally have like psychic abilities. So we all have our gifts, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And once we, without judgment, and the without judgment piece is really important, because it's not about going, oh, I'm so terrible at this thing. It really isn't that. But once we can honestly go, this is an area in which I struggle and which I need some healing. I want to heal in this area. That's the first hurdle, is to let go of the shame, let go of the judgment, let go of the I'm so hopeless narratives, and just go, I want to get better at this. I'm curious. Like, how could I become more fit? How could I become more intuitive? How could I become less anxious? Whatever it might be. And then the tools are available. And, something I've noticed, and this again is a really big part of what the book is about, is that we can outsource a certain amount of that. We can go see practitioners, we can read books, we can go and do workshops, we can sign up for online programs. I do all of those things. I know many of your listeners do too. I'm sure you do as well, Harmony. And at some point, it's down to us, and we just have to do the work, and no one can do it for you. And it might mean committing to a meditation practice. It might mean committing to an asana practice. It might mean journaling. It might mean taking herbs. It might mean going for therapy. I mean, there's so many different ways that can look, and it's going to be different for everyone. But really, the only person who can act, which is why, the whole low cost, at home, on your own thing, actually, that's where it really happens. Because you can go and talk to a therapist about feeling lonely till the cows come home, but it's not till it's Saturday night and you're at home on your own, grieving your marriage, and everyone else is having fun and you're stuck at home with young kids, that you feel like, oh my God, I feel lonely. Like, in this moment now, I feel lonely. And then it's like, well, what am I going to do with this loneliness? Am I going to drink alcohol? Am I going to overeat? Am I going to binge Netflix, or am I going to listen to a really uplifting podcast, or do some journaling, or read some scripture, or do some asana? Or, what tools are available to me to transform how I'm feeling in this sticky moment right now? And, I'm not saying I've always chosen the asana and the journaling over the chocolate and the Netflix, but overall on my path, I've learned to make really aligned choices that support me in healing. And that's what I'm wanting to share with other women, I guess.
Beautiful. And just one other thing I wanted to bring into the conversation, because I love talking about the goddess archetypes. And as well, in my book, Ayurveda and the Alchemy of Her, I speak of the 4 different Vedic, I mean, there's plenty more, but I speak of 4 specific Vedic goddesses that we can embody to be able to really sort of tap into the power that they have, which is actually our own power that we often forget. So I'd like to ask you, how can connecting with these archetypes help women reclaim lost parts of themselves from your perspective?
I love that question. So in the last part of the book, I dive into this teaching around the Ishta Devi, which is the idea of exactly what you've just said, sort of feeling alignment with a particular goddess archetype. And I extend that. Maybe, I mean, there are some people who are a bit more traditional that would probably have some criticism around it, like people who are more devout to a particular path of Christianity or Hinduism, let's say. But I'm pretty non-denominational in the way that I live. And so I draw from many different traditions. That's always been my way, and it's how I am. And even to the example, like going back to my grandmother, or like we could look at even particular celebrities, and again, it's not that we have to love everything about that person and embody them completely, or even that goddess. Like, let's take goddess Kali, right? Kali chopped the heads off men that perpetrated against her. She literally beheaded them and then wore their skulls as a necklace. That's pretty radical. And then the Greek goddess Artemis would shoot with a bow and arrow any male that came near her community of women with ill intent, or turn them into a bear was the other option. And so we've got these icons, these goddess archetypes that are full of fire and anger and rage and a don't mess with me energy. Now, there are times when that's really appropriate, and we really want to draw on that. And, if you've got a toxic boss, or you're in a toxic relationship, or someone has just spoken out of turn to you, that Kali energy is very valid and needed and powerful. But as the story of Kali goes, if we take it too far, I mean, in the end, what she does is she chops off her own husband's head, Shiva's head, and then she's filled with regret because she realizes she's gone too far. She's like, what have I done? I've killed my own husband. I didn't mean to do this. Like, I've gone too far. Luckily, because he's Shiva, he's able to kind of resurrect, and he says to her, you need to chill. You're getting too angry right now. And she's like, yeah, thank you. I know. Um, and so, yeah, sure, draw on the Kali energy when it's needed, but also know when to stop. Know when to go, okay, enough's enough. I need to actually calm down. Or it could be the other way around. We've got the beautiful Lakshmi energy, who is the devoted, domestic, nurturing, abundant, kind, forgiving, like almost the opposite archetype of Kali. And there are so many times when we need to draw on that energy as homemakers, as wives, as mothers, as, sisters. And then that can go too far and we become a doormat and we're just being put upon all the time and we're over giving, right? So it's always this dance. And if we have a few, this is how it works for me. I mean, I don't want to speak for other women, but if we have a few archetypes in mind, it's like, what energy, like I was talking about my grandmother, if I'm going to give a presentation, I want that energy of my confident, glamorous, in your face grandmother with her red lipstick on, like ready to be in that public space. But she was not a nurturer. I mean, she's not going to be the right energy for me to have when I've just given birth and I'm looking after a newborn baby. Then I need my other grandmother, who was very nurturing, my father's mum, who was like a real sort of traditional archetype of a grandmother. So I think it's really beautiful. And we can do this in our friendships. One of the things I talk about in the book as well is celebrating female friendships and lifting each other up, because women can be very mean to each other and very competitive and jealous. And I talk about this idea of, instead of looking at other women and gossiping or putting them down because we're feeling insecure, being less than, what if we were to look at other women and, okay, there might be some things about them we don't like, but what about focusing on what they're really good at and what they're really interesting for and where they really shine, and just leave to the side the judgment or the part that isn't for you, the part that's not working right now. That's a part of our self-trust and our discernment, is like, what energy do I need right now? What's going to serve me? And who can I channel, whether it's your grandmother or Kali or Lakshmi or any other, if you're Christian, it might be Mary Magdalene or Mother Mary. Like, there's so many different goddesses to draw upon, or even just, characters in novels or TV or whatever it might be. But what energy am I trying to embody right now? And where can I find it? Where can I be inspired?
Beautiful. Love that. Yeah, I really love working with the goddess archetypes. I think it's just such a powerful thing that we can bring into our lives, and really love that. Thank you so much for your explanation. It was beautiful. And I really want to wrap up and finish with this last question. I would love for you to speak to the women out there who are feeling really disconnected from their sensuality, their creativity, or personal power. What is one final message that you have for these women if they're feeling that way today? Where can they start to really step into that personal power?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are several keys to that, but one that I'll draw on to answer your question right now is the idea of finding pleasure. So many of us have become so busy, so distracted, so overwhelmed that we're really missing out on the pleasure of the human experience and being alive. And because we're so overwhelmed, instead of finding pleasure, what we tend to do is numb out. So, for example, let's say you've had a really busy day and you're feeling that sense of overwhelm and tiredness, and like you've given a lot. A very common thing to do is, a glass of wine and a bit of a scroll on Instagram or social media. And it's these are both numbing, I'm just giving examples, methods. And, they work to a certain extent, but they're not going to fill you. Like in Ayurveda, we have this word rasa, this like idea of like a juiciness or a kind of a feeling of really being in our feminine joy. Another alternative might be that we really turn to finding what is pleasurable for us. And again, it's going to be different for every woman. Like for me, I really enjoy creating beautiful spaces. So My home environment is really important. And my home's nothing fancy, but I just love to put flowers on my altars, diffuse essential oils. Like if I can make my home play some nice music, that can really shift my mood and pull me into pleasure. And with that pleasure, or it could just be like making yourself a cacao or a simple meal that you really stop and savor, or really enjoying reading. I love to read fiction, reading a juicy novel, but like, or listening to music, but properly listening, like actually indulging in like experiencing the joy of listening to music. Really seeking out pleasure and allowing ourselves to indulge in it. Essential oils are huge for me. I love fragrance, so that can be a really quick mood shifter as well. And then when we start to get better at finding pleasure in these small moments, in these simple ways, it kind of opens up a portal within us that we get better at being in our sensuality. Because actually, as women, we're hardwired to be more sensual and to be more in touch with the sensuous. And, I noticed, just to be really blunt, a lot of women around my age start to be less and less interested in sex. And it's often a problem in relationship, like libido gets really low. And I think a big part of the reason for that is because we're jumping into a sexual connection when we're already quite dissociated from this idea of pleasure and the sensory joy. And so literally like being more in our, like having a beautiful bath with essential oils, lighting a candle, listening to some music, like getting yourself in the mood, whether it ends up being a sexual experience or not, but just being in that sensuous vibe, I think is really potent. It's actually also very magnetic. So if we're wanting to manifest things in our lives, whether it has to do with relationship with others or even things like more money or more opportunities or more joy or more friendship, this rasa or this sensuous piece is very magnetic, because when you're in that space, people can feel it. They feel drawn to it.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much. You shared so much beautiful wisdom on the Yoni codes. I've really enjoyed the conversation and just learning from you as well. Where can all of our listeners find your book and grab themselves a copy?
It's on Amazon. So just hop over to Amazon. If you've got Amazon Prime, it's in unlimited. You can get it for free actually on Kindle. So if you've got the Kindle unlimited thingo, it's available for free. If not, you can, get yourself a hard copy. It's all on Amazon. So just go search for Yoni Codes, and I'm Katie Rose.
Yay, beautiful. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I hope everyone listening got something out of this episode. I truly did. I love, having these deep conversations with other Ayurvedic practitioners. It's just, yeah, so beautiful that I have this platform to be able to do that. So thank you to everyone who tuned in. Thank you so much to Katie. And go and get yourself a copy of her book, Yoni Codes. And whilst you're over there on Amazon, grab a copy of my new book too, Ayurveda and the Alchemy of Her. Thank you so much. And I look forward to connecting with you all next time.
Thank you so much, Harmony.